The Remedial Herstory Project is a nonprofit working to get women's history into the K-12 curriculum. To help us meet our goal, we produce media, lesson plans, and so much more. Check it out on our website, www.remedialherstory.com. The Remedial Herstory Project is funded through grants and by listeners like you. Please head over to patreon.com and become a supporter of the Remedial Herstory Project. You too can help us reform education and allow women to be seen, heard, and complicated. In particular, funds from patrons added from here on out will help us launch a crash course YouTube channel on women's history. We will be producing short 10-minute videos that educators can play in their classes telling women's history from era to era for both US and world history. Let's make herstory together.
Hey, Kelsie.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in today's episode?
In today's episode, we are going to be launching our first theme of season 2, which is Empresses, Monarchs, and Politicians.
I'm here for it.
All right, let's do this.
Let's get into it.
Hello, and welcome to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsie Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Neva Sullivan.
Empresses, Monarchs, and Politicians. In this episode, we are going to be asking the question, how did women rise to power in the ancient world? Brooke, theme 1, are you ready for it?
Yes, I'm here for, what did you say, butterflies?
No.
You just said monarchs.
Oh, not that kind of monarch.
Oh.
So we're starting off with this theme, Empresses, Monarchs, and Politicians, because the history world generally talks about government, economics, war, right? Military.
Okay.
And that formula for history is essentially rigged to exclude women because they often weren't in those things, right? Or at least they weren't shining in those things.
Right.
And so, you know what? Instead of lamenting that, let's talk about the women who were there. And there's a whole thing right now about sometimes it's harder for people to get to those spots. There's so much to overcome, right? To become a female or a trans or a whatever, blank. And so, awesome. Let's talk about those people that are there doing those things. And they might not have been the best at what they were doing. They might not have been the most significant, but we need to be talking about them because of how hard it was for them to get to where they are. And in the case of women, most often it was hard to do, get to those positions as an empress, as a monarch, as a politician.
And keep those places. But
what's really interesting is that the patriarchy sometimes works to try to dismantle their power and significance over time afterwards as well.
Yeah, like
downplay their significance. Yeah. It's just such an important one, and I think it's such an easy way to get women into history. Now, here's the problem with starting with this. I am all about having an inclusive women's history, and by inclusive, I mean women, however you define that, right? Like open, women of all classes, women of all races. And when we say we're talking about empresses, monarchs, and politicians, that is necessarily going to and likely going to be women of the upper class. Right? It's going to be women
who had access,
privilege, right? Through time, it's going to be a lot of white women in typical curriculum. But today I'm going to remind people that African queens were baller and that if you want to teach African history, talk about African queens. They made a whole movie about it. Anyway. So
there's a lot on them. They're pretty powerful women.
So amazing. This is a really easy way to get women into history, but there's that caveat of remember that these women don't represent all women. And in fact, they might have gotten to that top spot and done literally nothing to support the women below them. And that's a sad piece of history, but sometimes women had to work so hard to get to where they were, they didn't have room. They were
to
reach back and pull them up. And so you also have to have that empathy for the positions that they were in at the same time. So I think this is a really important theme to start out season 2 because it is just such an easy way to do it and to get them in And, we got some feedback from folks that were like, you can't get women's history into, ancient history because there's not much known about women. And I just want to call BS on that.
Scoff.
That is so cute.
Oh, you're so cute.
Yes.
Hold my purse.
I got things to tell you.
Hold my dry erase marker.
This podcast is sponsored by our patrons. Patrons get access to behind the scenes, regular RHP gear, bonus episodes, insights into our research, lesson plans before everybody else, and more. Brooke, read off these awesome people.
Thank you to Jeff, Barbara, Christian, Kent, Jamie, Jenna, Nancy, Megan, Leah, Mark, Nicole, Anne, Sarah, Alicia, and Katya.
Woohoo! Do you know what is so awesome about this particular group of people?
No, what?
Very few of them are actually educators. These are badass people who care so much about equitable and inclusive education that they are willing to put their money where their mouth is.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so cool. You too can become a patron of the Remedial Herstory Project by heading over to www.patreon.com and becoming a sponsor of the Remedial Herstory Project for just $5 a month. That's it. That's one latte.
I mean, it's one of something, but it's cheap, and you get all that stuff.
All that stuff. You too can give up one latte for thousands of children and women.
You could also buy condoms for more than that.
You could
reduce reproduction for less than that.
Brooke, most importantly, instead of lamenting that women's history isn't being taught in high school or that they didn't know these women, these people are putting their money where their mouth is and they are getting it into the curriculum by funding us.
It's awesome. And they believe women's stories are important.
Yes.
Thank you.
Duh. Thanks, patrons. We love you.
We do love you.
So today we're going to kick it off, and through the themes, we're going to try to go chronologically as best as possible. So you'll notice that we kind of like start over chronologically every theme. And so
you being all organized.
I know.
I mean, girl, get it.
We are trying. So today we're going to start with ancient world. And so the question is, how did women rise to power in the ancient world? How did they do it?
How, Kelsie?
How did they do it? So we are going to start, Brooke, in your favorite place.
Ooh, England?
No.
Mesopotamia. I was like, wait. It's my favorite thing to say.
Yeah, Mesopotamia, because that is where civilization starts. And in fact, we can trace. So for those that are like hating on women's history, you can't get them in. You can get them in freaking Mesopotamia. Okay?
I like how you made the people that say they can't get them in small little Grammys. You can't get them in
You
here.
can't do it. No more.
Versus like football coaches. Yo, where am I going to put this in?
Where am I going to do this?
We just stereotyped a lot of people.
I know.
Come back. Bring it back.
Yeah, that was
Mesopotamia.
Rude.
I want you all to take a moment and say Mesopotamia because you'll be happy for it. Mesopotamia. You're welcome.
So there are two things, Brooke, that you need to know and everybody needs to know about Mesopotamia. First, it is the cradle of civilization. And second, they drink a lot of beer there.
They always say that phrase, cradle of civilization. So that's where they think the Big Bang happened. Like,
that is where
this down for me.
This is where we do know from not history, but from archaeological evidence that humans originated out of Africa and migrated. And so Mesopotamia, though, is where some of the first traceable through historic documents civilization emerged. So they define civilization as a place that had hierarchical structures, had city-states, had
jobs, food,
money, had jobs, had specialization.
Okay.
But in particular, reading and writing, right?
And for those listening too, on a map, where exactly is Mesopotamia?
Iraq.
There you go.
Yeah. So
pretty wild.
Iraq, yeah. Tigris and Euphrates rivers came, that's where they would flood. And so there'd be these floodplains. And so they could grow grain there.
Okay.
And grain is in beer. There's an awesome book for those that are interested in learning a little bit more about world history in a light, easy way. It's called The History of the World in 6 Glasses. And the writer basically takes you through world history by the drink that was most prominent at the time.
Oh.
It's pretty cool.
Can I guess at maybe 2 or 3 of these?
Sure.
I'm going to go with mead.
No.
Oh. That was always like an old thing.
Yeah.
What was the one that all the Greek gods would drink?
Wine?
I don't know. Anyways, and wine.
Yes.
Wine. Are those 2 categories?
And then wine.
And then, is it wine?
And wine again.
Oh.
No. So the first one is water, right? Because they have to move where the clean water sources are. Then beer.
Just start with water.
I know. It's
Lame.
a little lame. Then, I maybe messed up the order here, but then it's wine. There's coffee in there.
Oh, that makes sense.
Tea, right? Think like the British East
Yeah,
India Trading Company.
China.
There's liquor for exploration, right? Because it lasts.
Rum, vodka.
Yeah, think Pirates of the Caribbean, right?
Is that real?
Yeah, actually.
Oh. Nice job, Disney.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a really great book, really easy, and this all ties into the lady that I want to tell you about.
Oh,
she is the first recorded female monarch in world history, and her name is Kubaba.
Mesopotamia we got to say, and now we get to say
Kubaba.
Kubaba. You're welcome. Everyone, all right, all together now. Kubaba.
She was the first female monarch in recorded history. We know about her because she's on the Sumerian King's list. And it's basically this list that the people of Sumer kept of all of their kings in recorded history.
I'm sorry, what's Sumer?
This is like one of the major civilizations that existed for over 100 years in Mesopotamia, in that region.
I'm with you.
Mesopotamia is the region, and there's varying
Sumer
civilizations.
Is part of it.
It's the name of like a small
subset
empire sort of thing. It's not an empire. It hasn't gotten that point, but
United
civilization.
States, New England.
Yeah.
We got you.
Yeah. So she's on the Sumerian King's list. And this is really important because we know that she's a lot of times when women are, we think of, a female ruler as a queen, but a queen is oftentimes the wife of.
Right.
And so to be listed as a king on the list means that she ruled outright. She was not like a consort to so-and-so.
No one's wife.
No one's wife.
She led the charge.
A lot of times women rule as consorts like through their sons or whatever. And like she was actually legitimately in charge. And thus she's on the list.
So is it birthright? Do we know?
So I'll tell you how she got there. Just to place everybody in time. This is 2400 BCE. So this is over 5,000 years ago.
Ugh, my brain just hurt.
Yeah, I know.
That's people were around. Good to know.
Yep,
And
pretty
they had
wild.
civilization.
Yeah.
And they named their children Kubaba.
Yes. And there were women ruling 5,000 years ago.
Say it for the people in the back.
Yeah. Okay. So everything that is known about her basically comes from the King's List. So that's your primary source. That's your go-to tool.
Okay, so this is a list a man created.
Yep. Men created. Yeah. And she is on it. The list and the details on it often blur the line between historic fact and legend. And it's important to know that her story definitely like shifts over time and she becomes kind of like a goddess that is worshipped. And so
because she comes like it's not sure what is fact or fiction.
Well, we know because we have earlier sources and then later sources sort of change her story to be more godlike. So how did she get to power, right? And that's I think one of the core question here. How did she do it? One of the historic sources claims that she just seized power. And that's incredibly vague, and I would love to see what that looked like. Like, did she have a sword,
Just one. Just her, by herself.
Spear, I don't know.
Walked right in. This is mine now.
And it's
goodbye.
Mine. Thank you. Again, hard to decipher what that really means. Another source is a bit more detailed, but this is without a doubt a piece of propaganda for different things, different reasons. And so this source says, Kubaba feeds a fisherman and persuades him to offer his catch to Isagila. Marduk, which is a god's favor in response, comes as no surprise. So Marduk is this god, and he says, let it be so. And with that, he, quote, entrusted to her, the Tavern Keeper, sovereignty over the whole world. So basically, her entire campaign to become ruler of, quote, the entire world, as Sumerians saw it, was to give a fish to some guy. Let's back up and understand Sumerian speak for a second.
I know.
They believe really heavily that gods give favor to different cities, right? And different people and different regions.
Okay.
And so when she does this kind thing to offer a fish to this guy, the god says, wonderful I now give you all my favor, and your city will prosper forever and you will lead, and yay, you're queen of the world.
Were there witnesses to this moment?
No. Well, at least not recorded in any historic documentation that we would use in modern day.
Okay.
So one thing that we do get out of that is that she's a tavern keeper. Okay.
Does that mean the same thing it would in our language?
Yes. She keeps a tavern. She's a bartender. She probably hosts people in this space.
I love that 5,000 years ago, the original job is bartender.
Yeah. So a lot of people think like, oh, okay, this is clearly a rags to riches story, right? Because she, was a bartender and then she becomes queen of the world, right? And by the way, world in this sense is how they perceived their importance.
Well, where my mind goes is that a tavern keeper who holds a lot of power, shelter, food, all these things. So if there is only one of them in this community, it is very powerful.
Yeah. And maybe she's not the only one, but scholars would absolutely agree with you. They think that being a tavern keeper, I know, Brooke,
Okay.
you're crushing it. This is basically running a massive business. And so it's more likely that she's this badass businesswoman who turns into a political leader. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, city-state. Yeah. And so the king says that she ruled the king's list says that she rules for 100 years, which is obviously an exaggeration. But we do know that the Sumerians considered her rule, anybody's rule, to be divine law, that there was sort of that divine right that we'll see in later centuries. And so she would have been granted power of Sumer during her reign, during the dynasty of Kish. And Kish is the city that she sort of ruled out of. And they believed that the god had given, this power and this protection for this city because of her, generosity.
Interesting. A fish.
Yeah. She's believed to have fortified the city and made it very strong. And after her rule, kinship passed to her son and then later her grandson. So she also sort of creates this dynasty.
Do we know their names?
I don't know their names, actually.
Was it Kubaba Baba? Because that would be fire.
That would be fire. That would be wonderful.
Can some historian write it and be like, accurate?
Accurate.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you, Brooke.
Once again, correct. And then the son of the son. Kubaba Baba Baba.
Exactly. So her epithet is longer than most of the kings on the list. And that's pretty significant because it probably means that she was significant. Somebody spent time writing after she died about her significance.
I mean, who would write about a woman unless she was significant?
Right. It says, the woman tavern keeper who made firm the foundations of Kish. So the foundations, right? She established some sort of consistency and stability in the region. And I think that's really cool. And it gives merit to her leadership, right?
Very cool.
Yeah.
No fish for you.
Right. So yeah, pretty cool. Over time, it seems that the human woman that we believe existed faded, and eventually she becomes associated with, divine goddess stuff, which I mentioned earlier. She is deified in probably the next millennium. So it's 1,000 years later that she gets this sort of goddess status.
Okay.
This is the Hittite period. The relationship between the deity and the historical person is really hard. Here's why it's complicated. So Baba is the name of a Sumerian god, and the prefix Ku means holy. So holy god, Kubaba.
Oh.
So that's kind of an interesting connection there. If the goddess does not stem from the real life queen, though, her legacy clearly outlasted the fall of Sumer because she becomes a god a millennium later, right? In this region. And even of a sort of like rival civilization, the Hittites. So that's kind of cool. So she is the great mother of gods, and she still boasted a cult of worshippers as late as 3,000 years after her death.
Whoa.
So that's pretty awesome given that she started out as a tavern keeper.
I mean, we don't know the significance of the tavern, so I mean, we can't downplay it that
But even just a regular businesswoman to be worshipped 3,000 years, I mean, I would like to be worshipped 3,000 years from now.
Just be Oprah.
Yeah. Or that, yeah.
I mean, I imagine 3,000 years from now, someone will treat her as a goddess.
Yeah. I love talking about Kubaba because I think she's a really important example of, as far back as most history classes start, you can talk about not just women, but very specific women. To go with Kubaba, I think it would be worth some people checking out an episode that we did on goddess worship last year. This talks about the rise and fall of the goddesses. And I think it's a really powerful episode.
So if people are looking for that episode, it's episode 17 if you want to go back to our first season.
Okay, awesome. So I want to transition to talking about another person in the ancient world, another woman, Nefertiti. She is an incredible leader, but she sort of fits the broader theme that you're going to hear over and over and over again in the various episodes of this theme, which is women that get erased after they are interesting leaders. So Kubaba, she's interesting because she's worshipped 3,000 years later. Nefertiti, she has almost the opposite impact. And so that's kind of interesting.
Strange.
She's considered one of the most mysterious and powerful women in ancient Egypt. Have you heard of her?
Oh, yeah, no. So I'll throw it out to a sixth grade English teacher, obsessed with Egypt. So we did a lot of Egypt literature, and we did a whole unit on Nefertiti.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What did you learn?
Oh my gosh. What can I remember? I really loved that teacher. I remember that.
It's funny that there's like a meme about that. That's
really?
They'll forget what you taught them, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Oh yeah, no, she was baller.
Classic.
And she got a lot of the boys really interested in women's literature, which is kind of cool.
Okay.
But what I remember is that she ruled outright for a long time. She killed a lot of people, from my understanding.
Yep.
And then, wasn't she an inventor of something? Or like invested in inventions? Maybe I have that wrong.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Like she was very into like science.
Yeah. So she reigns during a time of tremendous cultural upheaval. And at first, she rules alongside her husband, Pharaoh Akhenaten. And this is, so that's how she sort of gets her. How do they rise? She rises through marriage, right? And this is, a political marriage, classic, big families being connected. She was the daughter of Ai, who was a top advisor, and she was his great royal wife, his favored consort. And so when her husband ascends the throne, it's this big cultural moment in Egyptian history. They actually ascend the throne in Thebes. And then in the 5th year, they displace one of Egypt's chief gods, Ammon, in favor of Atan. And this is kind of, getting back to what we were talking about in Mesopotamia. There's this whole like political power play with all the gods going on as well.
Like if you're in favor with one god.
Yeah. And so they replace one god and try to, and they favor another god. And this is politically,
motivated,
sketchy. And so they end up having to move the capital, and they change their names, and her full name ends up meaning beautiful are the beauties of Aten. A beautiful woman has come. And her beauty is actually renowned. There's this bust that has been stolen from Egypt, and it resides in Europe. Veto. Classic Europe. But it's a beautiful bust of her that I think if you've never heard of her before, you've definitely
that she was like one of the most beautiful Egyptian goddesses.
You might have even seen a picture of this bust. She and her husband, their transformation of religion brought with it radical changes. And so this is kind of tricky because they're anytime there's big change in society, There's pushback, there's resistance, there's, people freaking out about things.
Not good at change management.
Exactly. So when her husband dies, she ends up ruling outright. On the walls of some of the temples and tombs that are built during their reign, she is depicted alongside her husband with a frequency that there is no comparison to other rulers.
Very cool.
So that shows that she's pretty significant in that reign.
Do they think that would make her equal to him?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So co-leaders at this time. She's often even seen in places of power and authority, showing that she's
the one in charge.
Yeah. And they even show her at one point like smiting an enemy in battle. Right.
Whoa.
So like definitely breaking gender barriers and that type of thing that you might think were imposed there. She gave birth to 6 daughters.
That's a lot of babies.
Yes, 6 daughters. And so her husband started taking on other wives to try to get a male heir, including his sister, which is really weird. And with his sister, he fathered the future King Tut. And King Tut is incredibly famous because his tomb was discovered and it is elaborate and kind of like
gold and jewels just like
top.
Buried deep for years.
Yes.
But he also was an interesting ruler, not just that his tomb was really cool.
Yeah, well, sort of. So Nefertiti takes over when her husband dies and she is the sole ruler. Interestingly, Nefertiti is pretty much wiped from the historic record around the 12th year of Akhenaten's 17-year reign. And so some people think that maybe she died, but it's also possible that she became co-regent under a different name. And so that kind of complicates her story. Here's where things get really juicy. There's a relatively recent article from the National Geographic, and it's titled "The Search for Queen Nefertiti Enters a New Phase." And they believe that this elaborate tomb for King Tut was actually a tomb that was built for her. And that she is actually buried in there as well.
Oh.
So this is really fascinating. He owes his fame, King Tut, to the stunning treasures that were buried with him, right? So it's interesting because we know so much about Queen Nefertiti, but yet they don't know where she's buried. And most pharaohs of Egypt are buried in a certain region, and they can't find her. And that doesn't quite make sense. So where did she go? Why?
So
has
if
she
she's
been
not
erased?
in there, that would be surprising.
Yeah. So because they've never found it, they think that they know that it's got to be somewhere in this area. So some people think that it's been hiding in plain sight inside a large chamber in King Tut's tomb. And in fact, people think that they built the tomb for her, not King Tut. King Tut died young. And so they think that they hadn't yet prepared the tomb for him and didn't know where to put him. So they put him with the queen, right? They put him with her.
There's no relation to them.
Right. So that's kind of a fascinating thing.
And how do they not know this yet? Like they haven't opened the door?
They haven't investigated all the different places. There's a lot of like, it likely goes here and it likely goes there. But there's a larger space that they know exists there that they think could be fit for a queen. And so one of the archaeologists thinks that she was interred first, and that the entrance to her chamber was later plastered and painted over. And there's a scene painted in Tut's chamber that depicts figures whose faces have physical features traditionally associated with portrayals of Nefertiti, right?
Oh.
And so it's kind of interesting that that's in his chamber with him, like is pictures of her. In particular, there's like a scooped brow and a nose, a straight jawline and a rounded chin. And so they think that that's her. So it's pretty cool that this is like an evolving history, and it could be really fun to bring your students in.
Doesn't it make you like want to just go back in time and ask them like, so why did you paint this here? Just want to check. And is she here?
Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty special. I think she's a really,
and correct me if I'm wrong too. They mummify people in this culture. Yeah. So it's a long process. They like pull their brains out through their nose. They like get all their excrements out of their body and they wrap them. It's a whole thing.
Yep, absolutely. So I think she would be a really cool way to bring women into history. We know that she sort of disappears from history, and we think that it's because of all the political, moving the capital and the gods and the, all of that. But how cool that we have an African queen who ruled, that she is shown in power in the ancient world, right? And such an easy thing that you could bring into your classroom.
Awesome. So what's the question?
The question is, how did women in the ancient world rise? Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
And I think you could use these two women as examples, right? And you could take that and apply it to other women that we didn't even mention.
Oh gosh, yeah. Of course. I love that. Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm Brooke Sullivan.
I'm Kelsie Eckert.
See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.